Welcome to this week's episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this week's episode, we decolonize Persia. We hope. Let's get started. This past weekend, I think I might have seen one of the most beautiful sights that I've seen in a very long time. It was crowds of thousands and thousands of Persian people and their supporters coming out from cities all over Canada, from the United States, and they came out in huge numbers to support the people in Iran right now. On our last episode, we talked about the double standards and the hypocrisy of the world really not speaking about what's going on in Iran. To their credit, I've seen a little bit more information coming out on the news these days. I guess they can't avoid it. But the biggest problem is, despite some people talking about it, things are getting a lot more heated in Iran, and many people aren't aware, or even aware of how important this is to their own lives. Many Iranian people, understandably, are very upset with the fact that their situation is not being talked about enough. When all of these other groups are dealing with oppression and being harmed and issues happening all over the world, all the media talks about it. But for some reason, apparently their lives aren't worth it. So they've asked many people to go out and talk about the issue, to make sure as many people know about it as possible. And since I have this podcast, I want to do my part to let you guys know what's going on as best as I know, but also to make sure that you don't give up this fight. Because this fight, you may not realize, is a much larger issue. And the people who are not telling you about this, it's their goal to make sure you don't know about this, because that's part of the bigger plan. You see, this isn't just about the people who live in Iran, the Persian people, the Kurds, and other groups that are living under the oppressive regime of the Islamic Republic. This is a good versus evil situation. This is colonization. This is a group of people who impose their will and their faith and their language and all of their rules on a group of people, most of which don't want anything to do with their religion. If you can't call this colonization, I don't know what else is. For all of those Western people around the world who are claiming they are anti-colonialism, that they hate the colonizers, that the people who have been colonized should have freedom, funny how they're so silent on this issue. Personally, I believe that there's a reason for that. Because they're not actually anti-colonialism, they're anti-Western colonialism. They are totally fine with colonialism as long as it's not the West doing it. If it's colonialism in Africa, where Muslim groups are killing Nigerians, we literally don't talk about it, because that's totally fine. Colonization of that area is good for us, because it's on our side. When you talk about the colonization of other people, like let's say, for example, the attempted colonization of Israel, the pro-Palestine movement, which pretends to talk about how much they care about oppression and human rights. But when you get down to it, it's only about the fact that they're mad that land is not under their control anymore. They cannot control or put their laws over other people, and they're kind of mad about it. And this is pretty clear when you see how poorly the so-called Palestinians are treated under their own regime. In Hamas or PA, no one talks about that because that's not part of the narrative. They are fine with oppression as long as it's under the right people. And this is why you don't really hear much about the Iranian people being under the oppression of their government, because it is quote unquote the right type of oppression. This is how you get a bunch of Western people speaking endlessly about the colonization and the oppression of indigenous people, but somehow a blind spot happens for the Islamic ones. So we need to expose this double standard once and for all and allow the Persian people, an indigenous people to that land, as well as many other minorities like the Kurds, to overthrow and get rid of their colonizers, something that the West pretends they care about, at least when they're European ones. For many of my listeners, you may be less aware of the current situation that's going on in Iran, which I get. Just like October 7th, many of our people say, look, I really didn't know what was going on in Israel before October 7th. And it's not your fault. You don't hear about it on the news. Nobody talks about it. But this is not the first attempt by the Iranian people to overthrow their government. There's actually a long history of it. The regime itself, under its current form, took over by force through convincing people that it was a great idea to allow the Islamic Revolution. Many useful idiots were involved. You can see this happening in the West as well. People who think that they're going to be better off under this crazy regime, once they get power, they then start murdering all those useful idiots, which is why they're called useful idiots. But since 1979, the local people have attempted on and off to try and get rid of this terrible oppressive rule. As an example, let's say in 1999 and in 2003, there were 2 attempts to overthrow the government or at least expand more freedoms for the people. However, as is always the case, is the government decides to kill enough people or oppress enough people in order to silence those people and go back to business as usual. And unfortunately, it worked. Again, in 2009, after a presidential election, there was a movement who was angry with the allegations of election fraud. Not surprisingly, an oppressive regime probably doesn't run fair elections. And in response, the government decided that they were going to put down that revolt. The mass demonstrations and chants against the regime led to many arrests and executions, which eventually put down the revolt. Again, in 2017 and 2018, there were university protests. This was over economic issues, inflation, unemployment, and overall political frustration. The outcome, as you can assume, was brutal suppression that restored control, and the protesters were either killed, arrested, or just ran away. These protests failed. In 2022, which I believe we talked about on this podcast, the Woman Life Freedom movement started with the death of Mahsa Amini, a woman who got taken in by the morality police. Yes, for those of you who are unaware, there are morality police who kidnap people for doing something wrong. And this poor woman, for wearing her headscarf slightly too far back and having a little too much hair showing, was taken and beaten to death, which then sparked a very mass protest against the government. This protest, I had hoped at the time, as well as many others, was enough to overthrow the government. There were a lot of people in the streets, and they were very angry, and they were willing to put their lives on the line to get rid of this repressive regime. Unfortunately, as is the case in many other situations, the government cracked down, the government murdered, the government arrested, and eventually the protests gave up. And this is what leads us to today. As we talked about on our last podcast, there were issues that were happening economically, financially, and we've seen a lot of people come out in support of overthrowing their government. Larger numbers than we had ever seen before in the past. This, if you follow the news, is something that we've never seen before. It is possible the regime is indeed collapsing after 47 years of oppression. Obviously, we have to add that since October 7th, the whole issue with Iran and Israel has definitely pushed the regime to the brink. Whether it is their people realizing how much money is being wasted on trying to kill Jews, and how that money could be used for their economy and for their well-being, or the Persian and Kurdish people realizing that the strikes by Israel against Iran has weakened their government enough to give them the chance to, this time, successfully overthrow their oppressive government. So we're at a little bit of a crossroads. We really don't know what's going to happen. We see mass numbers out in Iran protesting. We see mass numbers in the West protesting, which is amazing to call attention to this issue. But will it work? Will this time be different? We have seen the Islamic regime go to their typical tactics. As I said earlier in the podcast episode, they've cut off all power. They've cut off the internet. Thankfully for Starlink, apparently people are getting internet. But without power, it's becoming more and more difficult to get the stories out, to show the successes. It's also used as a weapon, so that way people cannot communicate with one another, where they're going to protest and where they need to be in order to overthrow the government. You're cutting all communication. This would be a tactic they're trying to use in order to stop the revolution from actually working. By strangling the communication, the ability to get information to one another or out to the world, they're trying to suffocate this movement. It's also very much to ensure that the crimes that are being committed currently by the Iranian regime don't get out. If people don't have cell phones to record things, the world won't know what they're doing. According to some reports from people who are there who have gotten information out, over 10,000 Iranian people have been hurt and injured so far by the Islamic regime, and about, or more, than 2,000 people have been killed in about 48 hours. They are massacring their people. Initially, there were some reports from insiders that they were hearing people speaking in Arabic, which, by the way, is not the local tongue in Iran. That would be Farsi. And these Arabic speakers who are killing local people are believed to be Hezbollah. Hezbollah, the people who are shooting at Israel from Lebanon, who are aligned with Iran. The belief is, or at least the suggestion from insiders is, that Hezbollah has sent fighters to Iran to try and save the regime from falling. As you know from our previous podcasts, Iran funds Hezbollah, and I guess they're calling in a favor. Do us a favor, come kill our people, put down this revolt, and we'll keep funding you. Also, according to recent reports, I don't know if this is true or not, I don't know if there's any corroboration, is that the Ayatollah has officially left Iran. Reports earlier were that he was planning his exit to Russia. Russian planes were coming into the country, and it's possible he fled. If these reports are true, which we're not sure if they are, it would mean that he is currently in Russia trying to ensure that his regime doesn't completely collapse. Again, bringing in Hezbollah, having his fighters go and kill people, and then maybe he'll come back once the country is stabilized again. It is possible that he would leave because, of course, he doesn't want anyone to find where he is and take him out like many other regimes that fell. He'd rather live his nice life out in Moscow. Supposedly, he transferred billions and billions of dollars, so he's good to go. But if he can come back, he'll come back. What a brave person going down with the ship, right? Funny enough, I wonder if he's sharing a place with Bashar al-Assad, his buddy from Syria. Maybe they could have a reality series, the two of them living together. Maybe they could call it Desperate House Tyrants of Moscow. I hate to say this, but it's probably pretty true, at least from the historical perspective. I fear at this point what's going to happen is it's essentially which side blinks first. You have a regime that's currently killing Iranian people, and the people, who are mostly unarmed, trying desperately to not give up this fight, taking over cities, taking over every inch. The more they don't give up, the possibility of them taking over an area when the government flees from an area because they've lost total control. It becomes a numbers game, really. How many deaths are you, as the people who are protesting, willing to put up with before you give up? And as the government, how many people are you going to try to kill until eventually you realize that they're not giving up and run? And it's a really scary thought because that number could be massive for both sides. Which one is going to blink first? Are the regime fighters going to give up and run away? Or are the protesters going to give up and run away because too many of them have been killed? And this is why we've seen some international support for the Persian people. Not many from the West, because they kind of couldn't care less and barely even mention it. None of the human rights groups, none of the UN, they really don't care. But we did hear recently from the US, President Trump claim that he's going to protect the people who are protesting. That if Iran starts killing people, he will get involved. However, we do now see that people are being killed on a relatively large scale. So is President Trump going to follow his word, or is he not? And apparently he's still debating. According to some reports, he isn't planning on doing strikes for two reasons. One, because Iran has said openly that if US or Israel gets involved, they will strike Israel. So that is one issue. The US doesn't want to bring Israel into it or cause harm to Israel by their actions. The other issue that both US and Israel are dealing with is how do you support the people on the ground by doing strikes? If you do strikes, it means that people might have to flee the protests out of safety. It might be counter to the protesters and actually force them to give up the protests while the strikes are happening. So according to some reports, The Americans are now considering things like cyber attacks in order to try and cripple the regime or help the people on the ground without using strikes or things that might be counter to the protesters. There have been many who have begged President Trump to make a decision and finally put it into action, because every day he waits, thousands of people might be dying. And again, it's a numbers game. If the regime kills enough people to stop them from protesting, the game is over. The people want to be safe and protected from the regime so they can continue protesting and not have to give up, and that the regime will give up first. The exiled former leader, or at least the son of the Shah, has been said that he wanted to meet with Donald Trump in the White House to discuss possible actions they could take, the situation on the ground, or future plans for Iran. Unfortunately, for some reason that I don't understand and don't know, the White House has said that that meeting will not happen, or at least is not planned yet, even though it was supposed to have happened. On the other hand, you have the state of Israel, who would get involved in the strikes, but again, same issue they have with the United States, they don't want to disrupt the protests. But Israel has come out and pretty much clearly said that they are helping the people on the ground. They support the people on the ground to overthrow the government. Not because they just want to cause problems in another country, because the Israelis and the Persians have a long history of working together, and Israel, more than most, understands what oppression looks like under an Islamic regime. They threw off their Islamic colonizers, and they want to help the Persians do the same and give them freedom. It is not an accident that the Persian King Cyrus freed the Jewish people from Babylonian exile, and now the Jewish people can return the favor by freeing the Persian people from their oppression. But they're not getting directly involved. They are doing covert operations. According to some reports, they're helping with things like information on the ground. They might be able to give intel and hopefully support the people to overthrow the government themselves. And surely, Israel, being the number one cyber country in the world, is probably helping with cyber warfare as well, possibly taking out regime information centers, making them unable to communicate with one another, which would undoubtedly help the people on the ground, making sure that the regime doesn't know what's going on. It makes it harder for them to put down the revolt. In the end, I felt it was my duty, as much as I can, to use my platform to bring up these very important issues. The killing of Iranian people, unarmed civilians protesting under any other circumstance would be seen as terrible, and we should all speak up against it. And the only reason why other people are not speaking about this is because, unfortunately, the Persian people are on the wrong side of this anti-colonization movement. If only you guys were colonized by Europeans, then the whole world would support you. But because you're being colonized by Arabs and Muslims, everyone pretends it's not a thing. And you should go back to the oppression, because that is the only group that's allowed to oppress people without any criticism. As we pointed out on our last podcast episode, the hypocrisy here, all of these supposed anti-oppression groups, all of the human rights groups are completely silent on this, because they're just showing themselves to be pro-Islamification. They are pro-Islamic colonization, and they won't speak out against it. All of those supposed pro-Palestine people, which, by the way, this weekend at these rallies that we saw, there were actually pro-Palestinian people coming out against the Iranian people. Not even just not showing support. They were fully counter-protesting an oppressed people wanting to be free. If you don't need any further proof on which side the pro-Palestine movement is, they are pro-Islamic colonization. They are pro-oppression when it's the right people oppressing. But one thing that's pretty much amazed me for the past 12 or 13 days that we've seen this resistance in Iran is how incredible it is that somehow the Iranian people who are trying to overthrow their government through resistance, as it is commonly called, haven't kidnapped babies, haven't murdered civilians, haven't committed sexual assault against anybody. If we are told by the pro-Palestine movement that that's how you get independence, that's how you end oppression, is by things like October 7th, why are we not seeing that from the Persian people? Maybe someone forgot to tell them that that's how you free yourself. Or maybe it just exposed the pro-Palestine movement as not really being anti-oppression, not really being resistance, and just being anti-Jewish. Just being people who are okay with those actions as long as they're against the right people. The Iranian people who are currently standing up and trying to end the Arab and Islamic colonization of their country are on the front lines right now. They are fighting for all of us in the West. Their win and their success in this decolonization movement is the front lines of the West. And God willing, these people knocking out their oppressive regime could put an end to the terrorism that affects the rest of the world. All Islamic terrorism from Africa to North America to Europe to Israel could be knocked out overnight because of the actions of the Iranian people. And I really don't think that they're getting the credit that they deserve for putting their lives on the line for the rest of us. And they should be appreciated and respected for their hard work and their sacrifice for the rest of the world. This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast and check out some of our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. We'll see you next time.